in light of Jerry Jones essentially saying stand by on signing Odell or not, do you think that Odell is going to be signed by some sort of playoff team for the rest of the season? Or do you think it's more likely that he may sit out and may not sign until after the postseason's over with?
I mean, just based off the information that we have in front of us, based off of what we've seen with the teams that were interested in the transactions that they've made as the season has closed, T.Y. Hilton again signs with the Cowboys, Cole Beasley comes out of retirement and comes back to the Bills. I mean, I don't necessarily know what I'm supposed to feel here. Odell Beckham was on The Shop, a show that LeBron James has on HBO Max or HBO, whatever the hell the company is, and they're talking to him about not to ask your definitive decision, or we're not trying to get an answer out of you, but do you have an answer in mind, and like what are your thoughts on playing for the rest of the season? And again, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically had stated, like, I could play in the regular season, but for what? Like I started my career and I had such a bad playoff performance. The biggest thing I wanted to do when I went to LA was to break that narrative, and I did. And everybody saw what I could do in the playoffs. And he goes, "That's when I shine brightest. That's what I want to do. I want to prove that hate wrong again." And how I interpreted that was, I'm too good to play for the regular season. Whether you sign with the Cowboys, the Bills, the Giants, the fucking the Texans, there are multiple people in that receiving room that are busting their ass just to be on this team, and practice squad players that are competing every single day just to be noticed and kept. And you think that you are too good to play the regular season while teams are fighting for playoff berths. Like, I'm not saying that Dallas is going to lose a playoff berth, but nobody's clinched other than the Eagles. If you go to the Giants, you think you're just not going to play, not going to help them, and if they make it by the skin of their teeth, you're just going to take reps away from receivers that have been giving it their all year. Same goes for the Cowboys. Same goes for the Bills. Like, what are we talking about here? We're not talking about Odell in New York after the crazy catch against Dallas on Monday night. We're not talking about Odell when he got drafted out of LSU and the hype that he had with his capabilities, with his vertical leap, his ability to catch one-handed. I mean, his route running, you name it. We're talking about Odell after 2 ACL surgeries and a broken ankle surgery. We're talking about Odell coming off of his second injury to the same leg. We're talking about Odell Beckham, who is just not the same player that we all know. And if I'm a multi-billion-dollar franchise that is looking to make an investment in a player to help my organization and team compete for a championship, but then he goes and makes public statements like that to basically look like he's too good to come back, I don't want to sign him. And I think the actions of these organizations in signing elsewhere goes to show that's exactly what they plan on doing. I think Jerry is playing devil's advocate because we don't know what Ty is going to be able to provide over there. He hasn't played all year, and last year he was injury ridden with the Colts. That's just his unfortunate mo as he got older. It's just that's what he's known for, which is just injuries. If Ty gets hurt in those 4 games or 5 games, whatever's left in the season, of course I'm sitting here drawing a blank. We're going into week 15. There's got to be 3 games left, right, Kyle?
Well, there would be 4 games going into this week, but after this
15,
week,
16, 17,
there'd be
18?
3 games left after this week.
Okay, so I'm just thinking like, I if Ty unfortunately would have kicked the tires like Kyle said, and he gets hurt, then I see them going after Odell because they don't have an option. But if Ty plays relatively well or just plays consistent, I don't see why they would sign another receiver, which is another mouth to feed, another ego to feed, and of course that's going to deal with the the off the field drama. Oh, how do you feel about what Jerry said? Now that you're a part of this organization, are you ready to play? Oh, well, we heard what you said on the shop. Are you going to give this team an opportunity? Blah 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 blah. So Odell at this point to me should just can it, shut up, and work out for teams as he gets healthier, because apparently he's not technically even ready. According to the Cowboys reports when they worked him out, I would just say Odell needs to sit back and shut up and just kind of just work out after the season. I really believe that he put his foot in his mouth, and he ruined his opportunity to compete again. And again, just because he sits out this season doesn't necessarily mean that teams are going to be immediately interested. He wants commitment. He wants money. He wants long term. After what you just said, I really don't know if I would if I'm a competing team in the NFL. I don't know if I want somebody like that in my locker room. Honestly, I really don't.
I think it kind of depends on the circumstances here. And the way that I see it is obviously I know Odell wants to get a long term deal settled. But maybe this is one of those scenarios where, look, you may have to put that to the side for right now, and you may have to go out there and potentially prove it to a team that could sign you for a postseason run. And obviously, right now, there's no guarantee that any team's going to sign him just for a playoff run. I think they definitely want to see what he could provide throughout the regular season. I mean, what's left of it, there's not that many games left. But nonetheless, if somebody's going to make an investment on him, they have to see what he's capable of going into the playoffs. Because, I mean, if you were just to sign somebody off the street like Odell for a playoff run and you haven't seen what he can do in the last couple weeks of the season, man, you're taking a big gamble that could work against you, even if you are a high end playoff caliber team. I mean, when it comes to Odell Beckham, look, Kev, like, I can't deny this with Odell. I mean, Odell is still one of the most highly regarded receivers in the NFL. And I understand he's coming off of an ACL tear last year. But if you look at that Super Bowl game before he tore his ACL, he was pretty effective for the Rams. And there were multiple games last year where he stepped up pretty big for the Rams. I understand that they had Cooper Kupp, probably the most productive receiver that we had in the NFL last season. But nonetheless, Odell found a very good role with the Rams, and he definitely made the most in that Sean McVay offense. But I think when it comes to this year specifically, we don't have a lot of time to work with here. And if teams are not 100% sold on the idea that you're available and healthy to basically hit the ground running with a couple weeks left to go, I think teams are going to be hesitant to sign you. That's why you see Dallas signing T.Y. Hilton instead of OBJ. You had Cole Beasley unretire, and he is going to play for the Buffalo Bills for the rest of the year. And those were two of the top teams that were going to potentially bring Odell into the fold. I know the Rams were thinking about potentially bringing him back, but it really wasn't worth it in their regard because, let's face it, the Rams have been an absolute disaster this year compared to winning the Super Bowl last year. And there's no reason to bring somebody like that into the fold if it's not really going to mean anything to set up for a potential postseason run. So, Kev, I mean, I fully understand where you're coming from with him basically shooting himself in the foot with the comments that he made on the shop. Yet I still see a potential for somebody signing him, a team that could potentially make a playoff run. Because let's say, God forbid, like the Bills, the Vikings, the Cowboys, like they lose a big wide receiver in their wide receiving core, they could look to Odell as an insurance policy. Granted, it's a risk, but at that point, if all bets are off and you got to fill that void somewhere, you may look outside and look for Odell services, and you may potentially look past some of the things that he said and maybe even some of his injury history. Because, look, I think right now, if I had to say, I think Odell is probably 75, maybe 80% of what he was last year before the ACL injury. And granted, I know there was a lot of optimism a couple weeks ago that Odell was going to be potentially on his way to be playing for the Dallas Cowboys, and Dallas just wasn't really sold on the fact that he was fully back from that injury yet. And we don't know whether or not the Odell is actually at that NFL conditioning speed where he can play a consistent amount of plays out there on the field, or I would say a significant amount of the plays to be more precise. So I think when it comes to Odell and whether or not that he's going to play this season, I think it's becoming more likely than not. Um, he's just not going to play. And I think a lot of this just has to do with the fact that teams just aren't sold on the fact that he's fully back from the injury. And I don't think they're going to be comfortable with potentially signing somebody if they don't have the assurance from him that he's fully healthy and ready to rock and roll as soon as he's signed on the dotted line with the contract. So, but just to kind of round this thing out, I'd say more likely he's probably not going to play for the rest of the year. And that probably includes a postseason run. However, I do not rule out the possibility if one of these teams going into the playoffs loses a receiver, they'll get on the phone, call Odell's agent saying, hey, we got a situation. We may need to look to him to bring him into the fold. I mean, at that point, Odell would have to put to the side about potentially doing this for a long-term deal. He'd have to go out there and earn it once again. But I think that's one of the only scenarios that I see him coming back on the field this year. It would basically be a backup option or an insurance policy if somebody were to go down for one of these teams that are going into the playoffs. It's the only way I see him coming back this year.